Hi, I'm Dan Fienberg, Chief Television Critic at The Hollywood Reporter, and I'm here today for an In Creative Company conversation with Taylor Misiak, one of the stars of one of my favorite TV comedies, FXX's Dave. Thanks for joining us, Taylor.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm like pinching myself that I get to talk to you.
This is going to be fun. I want to start kind of at the beginning for you, or somewhere near the beginning. And I went online this morning to check to see what the most recent count. And the pillow talking video currently has, at last count, 42.3 million views, which is kind of remarkable. But it's also being boasted about as being the 49th most expensive music video of all time. So it's a video that people talk about, and it's also one of the oddest and most amusing videos going. I'm curious, it seems like the kind of thing where it would be absolutely impossible to get it based only on a script or a description for it.
Sure.
Get told about that video. How do you react, and what does it take to convince you it's a thing you want to do?
Embarrassingly little. So the context was that I had recently moved to Los Angeles. I had graduated from college, came to LA with my big actor dreams. And I think it was that same month, the Let Me Freak Lil Dicky music video came out, which is shot in a similar style to Pillow Talking in that it has that kind of lip syncing comedy to it. And I thought it was so funny. I thought I had never seen anything that was still a fun, sort of catchy song, but then the music video was still this story that was being told in a really creative, cool way. And I just loved it. Then I think it was probably a year later, I had been taking a lot of different casting director workshops and classes. And one was with a woman, Carrie Barker, who was working at College Humor, because I was really targeting college humor and Funny or Die and funny internet videos. I was like, this is something that I could do. I could get some footage for my reel. And after one of those classes, Carrie reached out to me personally and sent me an email and said, we met last week in my class, and I don't know if you know who Lil Dicky is or even how you feel about nudity, but he's casting a new music video called Pillow Talking, which I was familiar with because I listened to the whole Professional Rapper album after Let Me Freak came out. So I was already so obsessed from the get-go, knowing very little about how they were going to actually execute it. And the initial audition was just memorizing, I think, the first 40 seconds of the song and then being able to perform it. And then there was more and more callbacks, and that eventually led to the full 10 minutes. But I just really had my eyes on the prize for that project in a sort of psychotic way. And it wasn't until after I booked it that the director had called me, Tony Ascenda, and said, just so you know, the way that the joke is going to have to be played out, you kind of need a sex scene at the beginning, because it's a parody of other music videos that start off as a one night only, very sexy sort of get together, but ours is the one that goes wrong. So I want you to know that we're going to do this and try not to make it too gratuitous, but we sort of need to. Yeah, exactly. But we kind of need to do it in order for the joke to pan out. And I remember thinking it's a big risk. I had never done any nudity before, and it seemed like a really kind of big and intense video, but I thought, I loved all of the other Lil Dicky videos I'd seen. I could see that he was getting better and better. And I could tell that this was a passion project for Dave and Tony and everybody who was involved. So I was like, I don't know. I feel like even though it's a risk, these are the kinds of people I want to be working with. I think I'm going to do it. And it's so funny to lo and behold, have the most perfect version, the most heightened version of that reason to do it end up happening to me. It wasn't just yeah, I want to work with these guys. And then they made a television show. That's crazy. So not too much convincing is my answer.
Are there still people who recognize you primarily from that video, and how strange are those interactions?
Yeah, they're bizarre. It happened quite a bit after the video came out, and I was still I worked at several restaurants, and I still had the red hair that I had in the video. And there would be a couple people that would be like, gosh, I know you. Did you go to school in Virginia? And then I would have to be like, yeah, I don't know. Have you seen a video called Pillow Talking? And then they're like, oh, yeah, sorry. Then they apologize for knowing me from it. But I'm so proud of it. I love when people are like, I love that video. It's so great. It's part of why I signed with the agents I currently have. Cause like at our meeting, the very first thing they said was like, we were all just surrounding a computer, watching pillow talking and like laughing. We thought it was so fun. So yeah. And it's surprising to me how many people, it takes a long time for some people to recognize me on Dave as the girl from Pillow Talking. Like I still get tweets now in season 2 that are like, did anybody else know it's the Pillow Talking girl? Like, I'm like, yeah, I think a decent amount of people did.
And obviously on that experience, you must have had a good working rapport with Dave. First of all, how long does it take to get in your mind Dave being different from Dicky as kind of a concept person, image, whatever? And what was the dynamic that you guys had that made, you guys a good match to actually go forward and do a series together?
We did have I feel like we just did have at least an initial good chemistry where we just got along pretty well. And then really Pillow Talking was 4 or 5 days of shooting where Dave and I were just in a bed for like 10 hours a day. So in between, because it was just such a technical feat that we had rehearsed a lot. And then by the time we were shooting, it was a lot of downtime of us just like sitting and talking. And we just talked a lot about our careers. So I learned a lot about his initial sort of dream of wanting to do the show. And he learned a lot about me and all the goals that I had as an actor. So that I think very much bonded us, because if there's anything to know about Dave, it's that he's like so ambitious. So to kind of just sit and talk about our dreams and our ambitions really sort of solidified us. And then it did give me that foundation, I do think gave me an advantage in and of itself when I read for Allie, because Dave was in every audition for Allie and they auditioned a lot of women, like a lot of people. And I could see, if you've never spoken to Dave before, A, being surprised that he's in the room, and B, he's an oddball. Like Dave is like kind of a little weirdo. So that didn't faze me at all because I knew him. And I don't think I was the only person who auditioned who knew him, but I think anybody who did would have had a slight leg up, because then you're just not thrown off by his oddities.
Well, for the first couple episodes of the first season, I would say it's difficult to understand what Allie sees in Dave. I think the show kind of leads with this is a ridiculous relationship that doesn't make sense. How easy or hard was it for you to get the image in your mind of what made these two tick as a couple?
It was mostly easy for me, because I think that so much of their relationship and a lot of like my friendship with Dave is grounded in just a very fun place with like a sense of play. And so when I think of Allie as somebody who just has a very generous laugh, is a very forgiving person and like wants things to be in this like kind of fun place, that it is easy for them to have this sort of chemistry and to make up pretty quickly about stuff. It's harder when they have the arguments. Like the argument scenes with Allie and Dave are tough, because I almost want to defend Allie. Like I think Allie should go harder sometimes. My judgment as Taylor on the character, but she has way more patience than I do and has just sort of a longer leash for what Dave can do than what Taylor would be. But if I just come back to that sense of like fun and playfulness between the two of them, if that's like my home base, then it's easy to justify their relationship when it's working.
And how open are the writers to the conversations where you want to be defensive of her, where you want to say, okay, there's no way she would do this, or she really should do this, stand up for herself, etc.? Really
open. And it happened twice in a very big way. The first was when we were shooting episode 3 of season 1, which is Hypospadias. And that's the one that does like the big deep dive on Allie and Dave's sexual relationship. And I went into the production office to read it, and we had like a bunch of rehearsals with our intimacy coordinator. And there was a couple of both actions and then lines that I was like, I just don't buy this. In a big way, there was some stuff I just didn't buy as a woman. And then there was other stuff I was like, this seems jarring to me as Allie. Like with the Allie we're creating, this just seems like a bit of an extreme reaction, or like I don't get it. So there was a lot of finessing based on what I found believable, and also what I felt like I could play the best. And sometimes they're tough conversations to have, like truly being like, I don't know if this would make her have an orgasm, or like things you have to have a very safe space on set with the writers and with the crew to like voice that. But it helped because it meant that we finessed that in a big way that I think helped make it a lot more believable. And then in episode 9, Allie's Toast, the wedding episode, was like such a team effort. And the fight, the big fight after the wedding, or it's like, I guess right before the wedding, it's during the rehearsal dinner, I really wanted to go hard. And I was like, there's some things Allie has been keeping in for a long time, and they need to be pithy because we don't have a lot of time. And I don't want her to seem out of character. I want them to seem like they're things that are like launching from her. And what was fascinating about that conversation with both our showrunner and the writer, Vanessa McGee, is we were developing all these lines, and Dave was almost a little too close to that argument to hear some of it. He would be like, no. He would start arguing with us as if we were all Allie. And he would be like, but I am the best rapper in the world. And we'd be like, no, Dave, so there was a moment while we were rehearsing it right before we shot it. Jeff Schaefer, our showrunner, was like, you need to step away. Like you can't have your fingerprints on these lines in the dialogue. And it might even help if the first time you're hearing some of them is when we're shooting it in the fight. So it's really helpful to like be a part of that conversation in those moments too, because I think, the downfall of a show like Dave that's named after a guy and is about a guy is that everybody could end up sounding like that guy. And so if it was, we all just sounded like Dave talking to Dave, it wouldn't be great. So it's helpful when there's like an open space for conversation when it comes to Allie's lines.
Well, it's interesting because, as you say, it's called Dave. It stars Dave. He's the creator. He's playing a variation on himself, but he's not the only one on the show who's doing that. Gate is playing a version of himself to some degree, but you're not. Does that make you have sort of more flexibility than maybe the other actors in the cast, or does it make you gravitate towards making Allie more like Taylor just to kind of be protective of her?
It does. I think it's sort of the second thing you said. There's definitely moments where Allie gravitates towards me a lot. And I think it has to do with the environment a little bit, about being in scenes with Dave and Gata and having it be played close to home. And just, and our show, stylistically leans to more naturalistic performances. So even just in terms of my physicality, it obviously sounds a lot like me. And there's things I'm physically doing myself. But it is important to make a big separation, because Taylor and Allie, I'm like, do have some pretty big differences in terms of their relationship. And I do have to pay attention to those, especially in season 2, the like single making new boundaries for herself and being very assertive and strong. Like, I am such a loosey-goosey, get back together with your ex kind of gal. And that is not what Allie is. So I do have to make those separations. But yeah, it's fascinating being in a cast where a lot of people are playing themselves. It's not like I go to work and I'm Daniel Day-Lewis.
Well, a Daniel Day-Lewis cameo on Dave would be amusing, I'm sure. I'm interested by your saying that the performances on the show are naturalistic, because they are. It's true, but it's also a show in which the most emotional episodes of the first season, there was a rubber sex doll in one of them. There was one that was built around a milking table. The Allie's speech episode, there's an extended scene with extended diarrhea. So you've got the naturalistic tendency and desire, but then you have the rather outlandish side. How hard is it for you to blend those two elements?
It's not as hard as I first thought it would be. When I first read the beginning of the rubber feet sex doll milking table episode, I was like, this is a lot. This feels a little extreme. And it felt, more absurd than our pilot. Like, we had shot the pilot and then we were working on the rest of the episodes later in the year. And I'm going, oh my gosh, like, what? I guess I have a misunderstanding of what our show is. Like, this feels a little bit different. But then as I'm reading it and it gets to the end and they end up having this conversation about intimacy and being open communicators with your partner and like that, and taking risks for each other, I was like, oh, this is the show. It's still very human and it's still very sweet. It's just that we're using very absurd devices to get there. And if you know Dave, you know that he believes in the art of the joke. Like it, so for Dave, having like a heartfelt tearjerker episode with a diarrhea scene in it is like the dream, because then it's just he's not afraid to use that sort of like base comedy to make people laugh. And while you're doing that, sort of sucker punch you with this like very sweet theme. You're like, there's a dead rabbit, there's poop, but now this couple that's very much in love is like breaking up because she's standing up for herself, and I didn't even realize it was going to happen. So once especially we finished episode 3, I was like, okay, I got it. We're going to use some of these sort of extreme tools to tell still something that's like very human and sweet. So I eventually got used to it. But then you show up to season 2 and they want to vomit on your back, and you're like, okay, well, I guess I'll never get used to this.
For you as an actor, what is the challenge of doing a show where you're not, at least initially, sure of where the humor is going? Because I mean, if you have this idea coming in and then you have a couple episodes where you go, maybe this isn't exactly the show I signed up for, how do you keep yourself going forward, and what keeps you convinced that the show is going to eventually be the show you thought it was going to be?
I mean, it does come down, perhaps I sound like I'm, a cult member or something, but it does sort of come down to my belief in Dave, and that I really am a fan of his humor and his bits. And like, so once you're with him, I find it pretty undeniable. So when we're on set and we're really doing it and it's sort of pitched to me, anything that I am resistant to, I can voice, and then we figure it out. And then, but most of the time, by the time I show up and he's really in the world of it, I'm like, oh yeah, this is great. So it's just a little bit about kind of being open to when you show up to do it, because I just really do implicitly trust him. And then the team that he's created around him are just really spectacular artists and like, frankly, comedic geniuses. Like if Jeff Schaffer tells you, like throws you a line, you do it because it's so funny. And so it's hard to be like, I don't know about that. And there's things that make me laugh. So it just ends up being a lot easier once you're in it. I don't know if that's a good answer or not, but.
Well, and obviously having someone like Jeff at the helm would be something that would make sure that you had confidence, because, he's the lead, he's Curb Your Enthusiasm, etc. And his background tends to be one of these shows that have a heavy improvisational component. And going back again to the idea that you have a lead who's kind of playing a variation on himself, how much is this all strictly scripted, at least at first, and how much is there a loosey-goosey feeling on set?
It depends. And we had a completely different situation, I would say, between season 1 and season 2, just frankly, because of COVID protocols. Like they did a spectacular job at keeping everybody very safe, but it was very hard. And in between takes, where in season 1, there would normally be this momentum of keeping everybody's throwing out jokes and we're pitching on ideas. All of a sudden it's like, everybody grab your mask and put your mask back on and make sure you're separated. And so there was just a little stop and go. But I will say that there is a really healthy amount of improvising, but it's always within the framework that the writers had created in the first place. So like if there are these funny, spectacularly weird improvised lines, it's not like any of us are pulling it out of our butts. It's because we were written to be in these hilarious situations, these crazy scenes. So they're setting us up for improv success, which is very calming to me as an actor, because when I first realized that we were going to be improvising, I was a little terrified. Like, I've taken classes. I think I'm a funny gal, but I was like, all these cameras on me for this like huge show. I don't know if I'm going to just say something funny. But if you're just living in the circumstance that they give you, it ends up being funny. And if you're in a room with Andrew Santino or Gata or Dave or Christine or Taco, like they're going to do funny stuff. And then I just get to like laugh at it. So
where do your improvisational tendencies tend to go, and how are they different from maybe what Allie would do left to her own devices?
That's a little bit where we align. Fortunately, and I've said this a lot, it's nice that Allie finds Dave funny because Taylor finds Dave funny. And there's been moments where in season 1, especially, I was supposed to not find something that Dave did funny. And it would be a little challenging at times because it's hilarious. So I would find myself when we're supposed to get in a fight on the hike, or we were supposed to get in a fight at the wedding, and he would say something to try and cheer me up. But the voice of Taylor inside is like, that's pretty funny. But Allie's like, no, this is not, we're not doing this right now. But it's nice that my character is allowed to have sort of a generous laugh in the show, because I know Christine, who's playing Emma, who does not have the most generous laugh, has a lot more challenges in that front. Like we'll cut and Christine will just start like shaking. She was holding in so many good laughs, but like her character doesn't laugh. So it's nice that in most of the comedy scenes, Allie can at least laugh at stuff.
And because otherwise, if she didn't, she would kind of move into that sitcom-y trope of the exasperated girlfriend who becomes the wet blanket. So how important is it for you to keep her from becoming that?
It's so, well, and we talked a lot about Allie being a device for the audience to feel okay loving Dave, especially in season 1, when there's moments of just going, this guy is super flawed, or he just did something that is really weirding me out or pissing me off or whatever. And then there's this touchstone of Allie who, like, hopefully the audience has a more trustworthy relationship with. And when there's those moments of Allie being okay or giving permission for Dave to do something or calling him out on it, one of the two, it's important that the audience can be with her in their relationship with Dave. But that can be challenging too, because you want to make sure that that's not her only purpose. Like you want to have her be like a fully realized character, which I think we really tried to tackle the most in episode 9 in Allie's Toast. But there's certainly little moments mid-season that are like, it's okay, Allie's laughing at this, or she thinks this is cute, or she's still with him, so there must be something that's good about him, because we like Allie, right? She's smart.
But the second season, which was largely based on sort of the mistakes that Dave has made with his friends and his loved ones and taking them for granted, Allie's deployed more as a strategic weapon. She sort of comes in and delivers these truth bombs or delivers these emotional bombs. Was your approach different in the second season when it was as this, again, strategic weapon more than as an every single episode, sometimes laughing, sometimes being serious?
Very. My concerns shifted in a big way, because my concerns of Allie in season 1 being either like too sanitized or just unbelievable at moments, and those were the things I talked about earlier that we would always work out to make it feel more authentic to me. My concern was her being too one-dimensional and like loving Dave too much. And we always added nuance and like tried to justify those moments. And then season 2, I came to set and I was like, Allie's too mean. She's too mean. I don't want to do this. And they'd be like, no, she's got a lot of like pent up stuff. She's got to let out at Dave. And Dave is really like violating these requests and violating these boundaries. And I'd be like, I don't know, man, this feels so different. So those concerns then very much changed my approach. And it became not so much focusing on what there is to love about Dave. In season 2, it was like focusing on what were the things that were making her decide this is not a good relationship for me. Like I really need to create space. And like I said, because that's not what initially comes to me as Taylor, like the love for Dave and the appreciation for Dave and that chemistry with Dave is like at its forefront. So I shifted my focus to work on the things that were working against Allie, that she was choosing to focus on and stand up for herself. But it was a big shift. It felt like at times a different character. The scene of Allie and Dave arguing in the hallway at school, when she says, even when I loved you, I did not like you, was very challenging for me. And I kept paraphrasing it. And Kitao, the director, and the writers came up and they were like, we get your resistance, but we need a take where you do it as written. And it might not feel like it's working right because it feels so different, but in the episode, it's going to work and we really need this. And I was like, okay, I trust you. And we got one, and that's the one they used. And I trust them. I think I was like, it makes more sense, but you do have to kind of see it in the journey of the season, which I wasn't seeing at the time. So
what conversations did you need to have with Jeff and with Dave about how much Allie was going to be used in the second season and sort of what their vision is for her importance in a third season, fourth season going forward?
Yeah, what a weird situation to be in. Because when I was shooting season 1, especially Dave always told me I want there to be a big breakup at the end of the season. So that wasn't a surprise to me. I knew there was going to be a big breakup. And as an actor coming from this like place of unbelievable gratitude to be working on a show and working on it to this degree, there was no part of my brain that was like, but what about after that? I was just like so sunk into everything that we were doing for season 1. Allie's toast was the last thing that I shot. My very last day on set was doing the actual speech. I did it and I got cut and I got so emotional. And I remember that night being like, oh, wait a minute. Does this mean I wouldn't be in a season? It truly didn't happen until like my brain let me think about it. And I thought, of course, you know what? I'm really, really happy with her journey in season 1. I feel really satisfied with it. And I think that it is surprising and I'm going to be really great. It's going to be okay if I'm not in a season 2. And then the pandemic happened and I was like, please God, put me in season 2, whatever you do, please. I need a job. I need to be in season. So my whole attitude went from like, whatever's best for the story to being like, please employ me. So I did reach out to both Dave and Jeff once we got renewed for season 2. And I was like, I don't want to be weird about this, but is there, what's going on? Like, is there going to be a space for her? We've just like never really had this conversation. And both of them gave a very positive, but very vague, like, we're not making the show without you. And I was like, does that mean does that mean I could come to set? Like, what does that mean? So then it was exciting to finally get the scripts and be like, oh, okay, cool. And in general, that's just been kind of their vibe. Even now in conversations is like, we're going to keep Allie in the world. Like Allie is such a big part of the show and Dave's character in the show. It's just a matter of like figuring out how to keep her in the world in a way that's authentic and is not forced, but still is like real to both characters. So it's interesting because there's a universe where I could have not been in it, where Allie could have not been in it. But I'm very fortunate that they want to keep working with me. So fingers crossed, Allie doesn't like die or something. So
that would be a different direction for things. But
yeah, our show does crazy stuff though. You never know.
Now, the show makes such very good use out of big name cameos. Does it change the atmosphere on set when you have a big name guest star? And have there been any times when you weren't supposed to shoot, but you wanted to just make sure you came to set because you knew person X was going to be there?
Well, season 1, I was such a fangirl anyway. I was on set every day. I was like always there. And at first people were a little weirded out by it, but they'd be like, you're not shooting today, right? Like hair and makeup would be like, are you supposed to be in the trailer? And I'd be like, no, I'm just sitting at Video Village. I just like wanted to watch. So I sort of shadowed really the whole season, which was awesome. Like I learned so much. And then by doing that, I got to be on set when there were cool people there. And it does change. It changes the vibe because you're always shooting that person out. So like sets are already so stressful and they're moving very quickly and it's whatever. But then it becomes, we're catering to this one person. Like we've got to shoot all of Kareem's scenes. And then we're going to turn around and you guys are going to talk to a stand-in or nobody at all. And it's funny to watch the show go from like focusing on being a big team effort to then for 2 hours being like just the Kareem Abdul-Jabbar show. And like, that's what all efforts are made because you just like can't waste celebrities' time. If Kourtney Kardashian is there, you're not wasting her time. Like you're going to shoot her out. You're going to figure it out. So it changes it in that regard. And it's fun to see people like, it's very like high stakes and whatever, but everybody that we've had on the show, these big names, in my experience have been very courteous and very happy to be there. And especially season 2, and there's more context of what the show is. They like get it now. Season 1 was a little bit more of a favor, it feels like, because they're like, I don't know what this show is, but it does change the energy a bit in a fun way.
Now all I want to know is whose time is more valuable, Kourtney Kardashian's or Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's?
Well, it depends on who you ask.
I'm asking you, Taylor, clearly.
Well, Kareem was so much more integral to his episode than Kourtney was. But it was, I would say, I guess Kareem, because he had to do so much more. He had to like act so much more. I also got a kick out of like, I'm a reality TV junkie. I haven't seen all of the Keeping Up with the Kardashians, but I've seen enough. Like, I think it's like, she's a big deal. So there's, always a big effort to not make a thing when celebrities do come to set. And fortunately for me, Allie got to freak out when she meets Kourtney. So I was like, I don't even need to be introduced to her. I want to meet her on screen. Like, I want it to be real, which helped. But she was like so kind and so polite and like said goodbye to me afterwards. I was like, goodbye. And the same thing with Kareem. I was like, I'm not going to bother Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Like, I'm not going to go out of my way to like take time out of his day. So I just like laid low and was like on the sidelines and was like trying to just like be cool. And then he sat down next to me at one point and turned to me and went, I'm Kareem, by the way. And I was like, pleasure to meet you. I'm Taylor. It was like, it's so insane to me that you could be Kareem and still like, obviously I know that's who you are. Wild.
And you actually there anticipated my last question, because I want to quickly change gears and talk about one of my favorite creative pursuits, namely podcasting. And you're the host of Table Flipping, a reality TV podcast. I'm curious, with that podcast, which of your creative instincts it sort of fulfills versus just your desire to yell into the void because you'd probably be doing it anyway?
Mm-hmm. Yes, both. Okay, great question. Part of it is I feel like as an actor, I don't self-generate a lot of stuff. Like I love collaborating with storytellers. I love working on the script with writers. I think I have an understanding of story, and I'm always like the CEO of my character, and I love collaborating with people, but I don't write my own things from top to bottom. I'm not a self-generator. I need to be like on set and working. So especially in the pandemic, I was really struggling with like not making something. I like started making candles. I started just like making stuff because I wanted to like do something. And I found that my friend, who is also a writer who works in comedy, her name's Alyssa Littman, we were always, as you're saying, screaming into the void with one another about just reacting to shows and doing stuff. And we were like, we should, you know what? Everybody and their mom has a podcast. We are two funny gals, and we could make something. Like, let's just make something. And it could just be for us. And it's just something to be proud of and to produce. And that comes from just a genuine place of wanting to talk about this stuff. So it's like, it's not necessarily making the world a better place, but it is a really fun creative pursuit. And it's really exciting to talk to other actors and writers and comedians about something silly like reality, because we find it's usually like sort of a dirty secret. Like when I was on set for Dave and Kourtney Kardashian came and people were like acting like that wasn't that cool. And I'm like, it's cool. I'm not going to pretend I don't think it's cool that Kourtney Kardashian is here. I know that makes maybe me look like a nerd, but it's neat. So it's a little bit of both. It's a little bit of let's scream into the void. And it's a little bit of like, let's create our own thing. Like we could produce our own work. And if it's coming from a place of just like genuinely wanting to talk about things that interest us, like, let's do it.
And just as a new last question now, how were your candles? Were they good candles, or did you really podcast instead?
No, they were bad. So I put too much essential oil in them. So I ruined like the wick so they wouldn't burn. And it was so sad. It was like, I would make them, and I made them in these like cute canisters. And it was like, obviously not that hard, but it was a thing. And then I go to light them and made a big stink in front of my boyfriend. Like, look at all my candles. And as I'm saying it, they like peter out. And I didn't even know a candle could do that. Like that a candle could not light. Did you know a candle could not light? If I make a candle, it could not light. So poor Tony was like, I mean, good. They look nice. And I was like, no, they don't. They're not even on fire. So I am no longer making candles, and I just make the podcast.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Taylor. And thank you everyone for watching the conversation.
Thank you.